I specifically know what call it was that it started from, March 7th of 2015. I was just sitting back and I got a call on my screen for an officer down, and I pulled the call up and all it said was a wrecked cruiser in somebody's backyard. When they got there, they basically said that he didn't make it. It was a fatal accident, and it was like getting hit in the gut with a cement brick. One of my worst fears ever since I started working there was losing an officer on my channel like that. Looking back on it, nobody checked on me. Nobody called. Nobody said, hey, do you need time? Do you need somebody to talk to? It was nothing. I was just expected to come right back into work less than 6 hours later and do my job. And I did. Other calls that happened after that I normally handled before, they happened so fast after that first one. There was shootings and carjackings. There was an officer got shot on my channel. There was one got ran over. By that fifth one, I knew something was wrong.
Today's episode of Minds on the Frontline invites you into a raw, human conversation about the unseen struggles of 911 dispatchers. We explore what occurs when those answering the calls bear their own heavy stories, and how healing unfolds when they are finally heard. Our guests, Jason and Kathy Lott, are the founders of the Thin Gold Line Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting the mental health and resilience of dispatchers. After Jason's medical retirement due to PTSD, the Lotts transformed their experiences into a mission, providing peer-driven support, care baskets, and conveying the message that no dispatcher should feel alone. During this episode, we explore the moment everything changed for Jason, what recovery involves, and how a simple act of support can make a difference. We also discuss what a healthy dispatch center might look like, and why connection and compassion are more important now than ever. Minds on the Frontline is brought to you by the Frontline Strong Together 5 program, which provides 24/7 mental health and crisis support for Michigan's first responders and their families. For more information on FST5, including access to resources and how to connect, please check out the episode description and follow us on social media. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Good morning. How are you guys? Welcome to Detroit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, how was the drive in this morning?
Hit a pothole.
That'll welcome you
So
to
welcome
Michigan.
to Michigan. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right on. Well, tell us who you are, what you guys do, and where you do it.
My name is Kathy Lott, and this is my husband, Jason Lott, and we are the founders of the Thin Gold Line Foundation. I started it back in 2019 when Jason was medically retired from Communications Center after his struggles with PTSD and almost losing everything, including him. We decided that we were going to form a group that was going to support other dispatchers, and hopefully nobody else has to go through what we went through.
All right, Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Jason Lott. I was a police dispatcher, like Kathy said, for nearly 20 years. I was also a volunteer EMT for 12 of those 20 years, so I was double-sided on that, on the street and dispatching. And now I'm, like Kathy said, also I'm medically retired and helping to run this foundation. And I also work for another nonprofit called Warfighter Advance, who helps military and first responders dealing with PTSD.
That's awesome, man. What experiences as a dispatcher influenced your pursuit of this mission with the Thin Gold Line?
Unfortunately, when I got sick, I was treated really poorly by the department that I worked for. There were a lot of accusations and name calling and not a lot of support from the people that I worked for.
Give me more context there. Why was there such a friction?
There was a friction because leading up to the final PTSD diagnosis, there was a lot of back and forth about exactly what was going on with me. So I was missing a lot of work. I was coming in late at a lot of doctor's appointments and stuff. And people didn't, I guess, understand what I was truly going through. So it would be, you know, oh, he's just trying to skip out of work, or he doesn't want to be here, or he wants to leave early for whatever reason, instead of that I was trying to figure out what was going on. So the treatment, it was from coworkers all the way up to the director of public safety at one point decided that when she found out that I had PTSD, I got banned from being on any county property.
Oh, wow.
In your opinion, after getting your PT diagnosis, looking back, what are some of those experiences do you think that added to this, created this? Because PTSD needs an event to really trigger these things. That's what makes it unique as a mental health disorder.
I specifically know what call it was that it started from. I was doing lunch breaks that night. It was March 7th of 2015, and it was really cold in Maryland, like obscenely cold. It's usually not that cold in March in Maryland, and there was ice and everything, and it was, I'm going to say the Q word, but it was really quiet that night.
Right.
And I was just sitting back, and I got a blue call on my screen, and our blue calls are our highest priority calls, and it was for an officer down, and I pulled the call up, and all it said was a wrecked cruiser in somebody's backyard. And nobody had called out, nobody was screaming or anything, so I sent the 2 officers and the supervisor over there, and I was just waiting for updates, and they kept saying they didn't know if anybody was still in the car or not. And I remember telling everybody that ended up going, I said, I know you want to get there, but it's really slippery out. I need to make sure that somebody gets there and checks on him. So when they got there, they basically said that he didn't make it. It was a fatal accident, and it was like getting hit in the gut with a cement brick, because that was one of my worst fears ever since I started working there, was losing an officer on my channel like that. And when it was time for the girl to come back from her lunch break, I told her, I said, you take over doing lunch breaks. I'm going to stay here and finish this out. You know, I can't leave anybody like that, because one of the promises that I made to myself when I first started working was I would never leave anybody on the street. What if they were hurt or deceased or anything, I wouldn't leave them there. And that happened at about, I think like 2 or 3 in the morning or something, that call happened. And when it was time to go home at 6:30, I told the supervisor that came in, I said, I'm going to stay here until I know that he's not in the car anymore. So I stayed until about 11:30 that morning. And when they had him being transported to the medical examiner's office, when I finally left. And I went home, and I just had this feeling inside of me that I'd never had before. And I was watching news channels, and I didn't sleep. Next thing I knew, I looked at the clock, it was time to go back to work. And I got dressed and went to work. And looking back on it, nobody checked on me. Nobody called. Nobody said, hey, do you need time? Do you need somebody to talk to? Anything. It was nothing. I was just expected to come right back into work less than 6 hours later and do my job. And I did. I kept doing my job. And then there were other calls that happened after that I had normally handled before without incident or without any problem. But they happened so fast after that first one. All of these happened within like 9 months. There was shootings and carjackings. There was an officer got shot on my channel. There was one got ran over. And all 5 of those other calls led to those suspects being shot and killed on my channel. They chased them down and killed all 5 of them. By that 5th one, I knew something was wrong. I asked for a break, and I walked outside, and I was just thinking in my mind, like, what in the fuck is going on? Like, I can't clear my head. And I remember my supervisor coming out and like screaming at me just immediately, not asking, you know, what's wrong or anything. She said, you know, we're short staffed. And I said, I understand that, but I just need a break. Like, I need to clear my head. You know, this stuff is getting to me. I don't remember exactly what I told her, but I think a couple weeks later, I got a note saying that I had to go to EAP. And in that culture at that time, EAP we saw as like a punishment. We didn't see it as a way to help. So when I went in to talk to them, I didn't open up because I was afraid that if I opened up to them and told them exactly what was going on, I was going to lose my job. So I kind of held things back, and she was like, all right, you can go back to work. And they signed off on it, and I went back. And I think a couple of weeks later, I asked to go back on my own. And then we started talking about, you know, diagnosis stuff. And they were like, no, we don't think that's what it is. And then that's when all of the, like, physical ailment part started. And I ended up in and out of the hospital for a couple of years before they figured out what was going on.
What happened? What did you feel like?
It was a muscular pain, like you had done yard work all day long in the heat. And you wake up that next day and you're sore, but multiply it by like 5. And then on top of that, it was joint pain, like I was sick or had the flu, but times 5 also. And then I would have headaches, and I would throw up, and I would get nauseous, and, you know, just debilitating pain and sickness going on. And we kept going in and out of the emergency room, and they could never find anything. And then one doctor in the ER checked for porphyria, which is a rare blood disease that's based on vampires back in the day. And
Well, you are a dispatcher. You guys are only
Right.
Working that
Yeah, we
midnight
didn't have
shift.
any windows.
Yeah.
So that came back positive, and I remember looking at the blood results, and it said this can only be correlated if you have symptoms to match. And all of the symptoms that I had matched porphyria, so that's what they thought it was. So the attacks of pain and nauseous and sickness started coming more frequently. It was about every 3 or 4 weeks.
One of the keys that I remember specifically was a lot of his nausea and vomiting would come when he was trying to go to work. He would wake up and he would try, right? He'd get his pants on, he'd get in the car, and he would be on his way to work, and he would call me and say, I'm on the side of the road, I'm throwing up, I have pain everywhere. And there were a few times where those symptoms, like at their peak, were correlating with him attempting to go to work. And now that we look back, we're, okay, well, he was gearing himself up. He was psyching himself up to go to work. And it was leading to these symptoms. But we had no idea that there was a correlation. 2016, we were in the hospital, had seen every single specialty that you can possibly see. When that porphyria diagnosis did finally come around, we thought, oh, yay, this is what it is. We're gonna treat it, and everything's gonna be kosher. But there was a brilliant hematologist that ended up taking his case one of the many times he was in the hospital, and that's where the PTSD diagnosis actually came from. This wonderful man who sat down and actually talked to Jason and found out, when are you having symptoms? What are your symptoms? What do you do for a living? What does that mean to you? And he's the one who put all the puzzle pieces together and said, my man, I'm pretty sure it's PTSD. And we both looked at each other and were like, that's in your head. Like, that's not,
right,
that's
how
not
does that,
that's
how
not
does
a
this
physical
manifest
thing.
as
Right.
these things? Yeah.
But, how does that cause nausea and vomiting and pain? But he sent us in the right direction, and we ended up getting the valid diagnosis at that point from a psychologist up in Baltimore, and kind of went from there.
So when you got that diagnosis, was it the same type of feeling of at least we know what it is? Or was it a new obstacle because it was so stigmatized?
It was
maybe?
very foreign. It was very foreign. And with the type of work I do with physical therapy, I treated gunshot wound to his knee and, the dog bite to his hand and, his back pain. And
I feel like we missed a couple stories here.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold on.
That's a whole nother
That's a whole nother podcast.
Another podcast.
All right. Yep.
That's pre-PTSD.
Okay. All right.
The life before COVID, the life before PTSD.
Right.
So, I was used to treating all of these physical orthopedic ailments, and when they were talking about, from the head up, I'm like, this is out of my wheelhouse. I have no idea what to do. I'll hold your hand.
Yeah.
But that's about it. So
Well, when you get a medical diagnosis, there's a relief there because you find out what it is.
Yeah, it's got a big fancy name.
But even 2017 not being that long ago, it's a lifetime as far as mental health goes. So as soon as I heard it, it was more of a fear than a relief, because I knew just from what I thought I knew, it had the potential to be really bad for me.
When you say it's going to be really bad.
So the first thing anybody thinks back then is, I'm going to be locked up. It's a fear because the way the world looks at it. Once you get into it and you're stripped of certain things and you're voluntarily going to appointments, it starts to ease up a little.
I think part of it's feeling like, okay, this is a life sentence. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
sure.
Like,
Yeah, that too.
Like there's I have it, it's never going away.
Right.
You know what I mean? Type deal.
Right. It was the unknown. I think.
And it was a different time then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mental health in the past 10 years has grown leaps and bounds when it comes to first responders.
Yes,
and there's
it
certainly
has.
many, many treatments that are very effective for PTSD, and they're much more well known now because
Right.
more people are willing to talk about these certain things, and some diagnoses aren't being slipped through.
Right.
We've learned a lot. We know now that the psych meds, they're not always the answer, and they're certainly not in the way that they were delved out to him. That was not the answer.
Well, let's go down that road. Let's talk about all the treatments. So you get your diagnosis, and then you're on a path, right? So at least you know which path to take now.
Correct.
It's the correct one. So what does that look like in treatment?
So it started just talking to a psychologist. I was there 3 days a week to begin, I think.
It was heavy,
Yeah, it was 3 days a week, I think an hour each time. And then I don't quite know how long it was into it, but I went to my primary care doctor for a follow-up, and we were talking about how it was going. And I said, well, I'm not getting worse, but I'm not getting any better. And we talked about it for a little while, and he said, well, probably need some medication to help you. So we found a psychiatrist in the same area that I was seeing the psychologist in, so I could go, bounce between the two of them and not have to drive all over the place. And the psychiatrist that I saw was very conservative and very smart. It started as small doses, and I was slowly getting better, but I didn't think that I was making the progress that I should have. So he actually left and focused on his inpatient clinic. Every couple of weeks when I went in there, I never saw the same doctor twice. So 1 med turned to 3, and then 3 turned to 6, and then 6 got doubled, and at one point between 15 and 20 different medications, between psych meds and benzos and medications to keep me awake and medications to help me sleep.
Pain
meds, everything. And it got to a point where I started sleeping 20 hours a day. And one of the side effects of that was every time I would go to the doctor, my blood pressure would be high. Instead of correlating the high blood pressure to the medication, they correlated it to a health problem, and they added blood pressure medicine, at which point a few days later I started passing out. There were times I would be in Target and just kind of like snap into it and be like, how the hell did I get here? Like, why am I even here? Mm-hmm. Like, I was surprised I was wearing shoes and pants, looking down, and that's scary.
At that point, he wasn't working, right? So he had, at this point in, I think, end of 2018, early 2019, this is when he really started to become the zombie, and definitely wasn't working. Wasn't really doing much of anything, like really anything. I mean, he was sleeping 20 hours a day, so there wasn't much room for anything else by the time 2019 rolled around.
So at what point in the process were you starting to get better? How did we get to the point now where you seem like you're a pretty happy, healthy dude?
Warfighter Advance.
Okay.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
get us into what that is.
Okay, so
they sound cool.
Kathy went to our county fair, and I was at home sleeping like I did, every day, all day.
Best county fair ever.
Okay.
Which county fair?
Charles County, Maryland. Best county fair ever.
You heard it here first.
Yep.
She walked across and saw the warfighter tent set up, and there was a guy working there, and she started talking to him and asking what it was about, and they said, we help military personnel and veterans and
PTSD and
so she asked if they took first responders, and that's when his name is Jim Buckingham. Jim Buckingham asked Kathy what my name was, and she told him, and we had rode at the firehouse together when I was an EMT. So
oh wow.
He's like, oh man, I'm so sorry that he's going through that. Let me talk to Doc and see what we can do. And Doc V is the leader of the group. So she talked to Jim and said, yeah, invite him. So I filled out the application, and I cornered him one day, and I said, you're going to this program. It's going to help you.
What did the program offer?
You're reacting normally to an abnormal experience. So there has to have been an abnormal experience for you to start going through PTSD. That's the cornerstone of PTSD. So there are healthier ways to deal with it. There are other people like you, because one of the main caveats that you feel when you have PTSD is that you're by yourself. And that causes isolation, and isolation causes more problem. So there's groups out there, there's other veterans, there's other first responders going through things that when you gain a little bit of trust in a group and you start talking and shared experiences, then things start to come out. That is one part of the process. The other part is that there's different paths that you can take. There's exercise, there's better nutrition, there's hobbies that you can engage in, there's understanding between family and friends about, maybe I can't go to a party today because I'm having a bad day. Mm-hmm. And if you talk through that with your family, it's a better thing. So
and the family is less likely to blame the person for, oh, you just don't want to go, or, oh, you're just being lazy or whatever. And it's gaining an understanding of there's something at play here.
So Kathy, talk a little bit about how not only Jason's work as a dispatcher, but going through this journey with him. How did that affect you personally, not only as his partner, his wife, but also a mother? And how did you kind of navigate those at home?
The early years were easy. It was, he went to work, he came home. He really didn't say much about his job. We didn't talk about any of his calls or anything like that. I was a proud dispatcher wife. So proud dispatcher wife kind of moved into the worried, sick wife when he did start to get sick. So that first call that he talked about, that one that triggered everything, he came home that day. He was late coming home that day. So I'm like, you were supposed to be home at 6:30 this morning. He's like, I can't right now, So he went into the bedroom, kind of locked himself in there until he woke up and started to get ready to go back to work. Like, okay, great. Like, you're just jumping from, one shift to the next. And the navigation those first couple of years was hard. I felt like if I wasn't working, I was at a doctor's appointment or in a hospital. And that was our life. We were at one point going to food banks and the food handouts, and, we were selling things at home because, we were trying to make our mortgage payments. His friends would give him as much leave up to the point that he did lose his job. Like, police officers and everybody in the communications department were giving him leave all the time. And then finally that kind of ran dry.
Having gone through it now, what advice could you give right now, having gone through all of that?
The biggest thing when somebody's in public safety and the things that they see or they hear on a daily basis, they need to be honest with their family and their friends and talk to them. They don't need to give them gory details of things that they've seen or heard or any of that. But when you bury things as a first responder, those things are going to eventually come out, and like they came out in May. If I would have learned immediately to just talk to my wife and my friends and say, I had a bad day at work, I need A, B, or C, I need, fresh air, I need something. You need to develop a plan with them, because even now, being on the upside of things, I still have bad days. Driving down here, I was having a bad day even before I hit the pothole. But you have to learn to accept those days as they come and not try to fight them. The harder you fight them, the more you bury that stuff, and that's not a good thing. Because there's still some days that I look at Kathy and I say, I can't go to dinner with your family tonight because that's just too much for me. You have to build an understanding with your family and friends and invite them into that world a little bit so they know that the things that you're seeing and hearing or dispatching are not in the realm of normal activity for a human being, that stuff affects you, and that you have to develop a plan with your family.
Yeah. Planning is probably a key, definitely talking. I don't know that I really ever asked him, how did your day go? I think I just kind of waited for him to just say, hey, this is happening, but it just never happened. Like, he wouldn't tell me how his day was going. I didn't ask. The talking through, again, not the gory details, but if he would have just said, I'm struggling, or, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go. And looking back at kind of the habits that we form, he stopped drinking in 2011. Up to that point, there was a lot of drinking. And I'm sure the Friday nights or the nights that he was off work, some of that drinking was drowning some of what he was feeling. Finding healthier habits, I think, would be good for families. So,
but also as first responders, we have a fear. We have a fear of career suicide. We also have a fear of losing somebody that we open up to. We have to get over that fear, because the options for help are much better than they were in 2017. There are protections for first responders, but also if you're that afraid to open up to somebody in your family or one of your friends that you're having a hard time or that you're struggling because you're afraid that person is going to leave, then that person may not even be right for you to begin with.
Right.
Because if they do leave, then they really never loved you or were beside you through what you were going through.
I had PTSD years ago as well. And when you're in that fog of PTSD, you don't see how many people actually care about you.
Right.
All that matters is what's going on with you. You don't get to see that. Right.
Right.
And I think as things become a lot clearer, you start getting help, you realize, like, I actually did have a lot of support, but I just didn't see it.
Right.
Because I was afraid, you're afraid people are going to treat you different. People are going to think you're crazy. People are going to, those types of things.
And we're not telling you if you go down this path, you're going to feel better. We're giving you a multitude of paths that you have to decide to pick which one is best for you and which one is going to work better. Some people can do breathing and feel better. Some people have to do yoga to feel better. Some people have to eat healthier to feel better.
Cut sugar.
The treatment is as individualized as the person itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
As having PTSD, we need to step back and look for the people that are caring and the people that are offering us different pathways to get out of that fog that you're talking about. Because if you're stuck in there fearful of losing your job or your family or somebody thinking something bad about you, then you're never going to get better. You're just going to continue, snowballing backwards.
And that's the whole reason we formed the Thin Gold Line Foundation, is to make sure that other dispatchers don't mirror the same story that we're telling. And by telling the story, we hope that people will see that there's help out there and that there's other people that they can lean on.
So let's shift gears directly into dispatch a little bit. Now, you've obviously shown, and what we see a lot on this show from dispatchers is that they're the unsung first responder who gets the phone call for the worst day of this person's life. You get the introduction to a horror story, and then you move on. And you're on to the next one, right? You don't get to complete anything, so you don't get any closure on it.
Correct. Yep.
So we talk about that a lot. But in addition to that, from your perspective, what are some of the most misunderstood or overlooked mental health challenges faced by dispatchers?
So through call taking and dispatching, there's a thing that it took me a while to figure it out why these things stuck with me so long. And it's because when we're on the phone with somebody or we're dispatching a call, or God forbid both, we're dispatching both and taking 911 calls, you form, even though you're not physically there, you form a mental picture in your mind of what is going on over the phone or over the radio. And that mental picture you form in your mind is to help the person that you're calling and help the first responders that are going to the call for safety and for medical help and for everything else. So this image sears in your brain of what you create in your mind. That image, we all have these unique, extravagant imaginations. Oftentimes that picture of what's going on is probably way worse than what's actually there. And a lot of first responders, especially in rural areas, and dispatchers, they do both. They're, a firefighter, or they're a police officer, or they're an EMT, and they also dispatch. So when you're seeing both sides of it, and then an EMT's on the phone dispatching and they hear something going on, they're like, if I was only there, I'd be able to help. That feeling of helplessness, but also that picture in your mind, sticks with you. Because when that call came on my screen, I imagined the worst looking car and the worst looking scene I could fathom, because you have to go worst so then everybody knows, just like in the police department, everybody's armed unless proved otherwise. Mm-hmm. So you build the worst up so they know what they're prepared for. Because if it's less than that, it's okay. But if you're not building it up and it's worse than it is, then you're
you're behind the 8 ball.
Right.
Now you're going to need resources.
You're preparing for the worst, but hope for the best.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So finally did see pictures of that accident scene. It was nowhere near as bad. But the way that, the injuries happened, it was a freak accident.
The visual of the scene did not correspond to the outcome, which was still very bad.
Right.
As you're suffering in that view, you're painting the picture and you're suffering as you look at it.
Right.
Because that's all you can do is look at this thing that you're imagining and hyper-imagining right over itself.
Correct. So many people across the world still think that we are secretaries and do admin work, and that's all we do, and that stuff doesn't bother us. And
you just answer the phone.
Right.
Yep.
We just answer the phone, or
we just dispatch.
We just read what somebody put in a call. But we're involved in those things through the mental imagery. But also the people on the street that we're dispatching to, you form a family bond with them. And a lot of my best friends still are police officers and firefighters and EMTs. And when you're dispatching calls to people that you know, even people that you don't know, that you feel that are family, you have that sense of responsibility to them. And if something happens, if they crash on the way there, or, they get in a shootout or a foot chase, you're right there with them listening. That mental imagery is almost like having a video camera there.
Mm-hmm. And that's one thing, I'm glad you brought that up, is, we've had dispatchers on here, and it's one thing that I know I've taken away, Jeff, I know you've taken away too, is I now call on those more priority runs. I'll call the dispatchers and say, this was the outcome. Because before doing this and before doing the podcast and talking to dispatchers, I never even thought about it. We all considered you guys first responders, but we never thought about giving you a call and saying, hey, this is how it ended up. It's something simple that can really make the difference to those dispatchers, right? It's just a quick phone call, hey, this is what happened.
Even if it's negative, because there's still that closure. You're not left wondering. That's an amazing idea.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be all of the most traumatic calls. It could be just the good calls.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that helps with you guys and your work environment and your mental health when you leave there. Along those same lines, though, Kathy called you subject matter expert when it comes to dispatch and mental health and dispatcher mental health. What, in your mind, if you could build the most supportive work environment and a healthy work environment for dispatchers, what would that dispatch center look like to you?
Wow. First of all, windows.
Okay.
I know there's security issues in some dispatch centers because ours house the emergency broadcast system too. So we couldn't have direct windows in the center, but we could see them.
Yeah.
But there was no light coming through.
Yeah.
Even skylight.
They're all tinted windows.
Right.
Yeah.
And bulletproof glass and everything else, and they don't open.
Why are the lights always off in the room? It's
I
always,
never got that.
It's always like after 8 o'clock p.m. vibe in there.
Mm-hmm.
I was brought up with no lights. And
What's the reason for that?
To me, it was calmer in the background.
Okay.
There wasn't so much noise that
Distraction, maybe?
Right.
Okay.
Visual noise almost in your way?
Yeah, it helps you to focus on the screens in front of you.
Okay.
And there's so many lights. You have a bright computer screen, a bright light above your head. There's just too much going on.
Okay.
And then when we moved to our new building, there was a rule that came out that we had to keep the lights on all the time, no matter if it was 3 o'clock in the morning or not. That was very distracting. So windows, individualized lights, so a dispatcher can choose whether they want to be in the dark or not. A quiet space to go to when there is a bad call or something they need to step away from. There needs to be a heavy push to staff these centers because none of this is going to work without that. So if you're having a bad day and you're by yourself, you're stuck on the radio.
And that's an unfortunate reality we hear everywhere is the shortage of dispatchers.
They all are. Every single PSAP that I'm aware of is running short.
Up our way, we have a young lady who reached out and said they have a person who is has been there for a little while, and she looks at him and she's like, he's not getting it. Like he's putting in the wrong information, and he's not getting it. But what do you do?
Yeah.
He's a warm body in the seat, you know.
Yeah.
So
we recently spoke about this with another dispatcher, and he was remarking that it used to get a lot more people apply for the job because the compensation and the long term, there was a pension, there was a better retirement there. And there's a very, very clear correlation between the diminishing of that and the decrease the amount of candidates that are high quality humans that are willing to operate in that capacity.
Right.
Even the EMTs up our way, we found out they only make like $12 an hour.
Yeah.
You go to McDonald's and you make $14.
Exactly.
So,
and it's across all the first responders.
Which are you going to
the shortages.
choose?
And those shortages lead to more hours, which leads to more burnout, which leads to what you're talking about, where you don't have that minute for yourself because you got to get back on the phones, because if you're not on the phones, nobody's answering them.
And I'll admit this, it was very shitty of me when we moved up here and we started going into the centers around us. And I'm like, wow, they dispatch 300 calls a year. I did that in a night.
Right.
Like,
you're not kidding. Yeah.
They can't be dealing with the same shit that I did. But then I was talking to Kathy and I was like, wait a minute, because she was telling me some of the stuff they dealt with. In these small towns, they know everybody, like personally, that they're answering 911 calls for, and they know the police officers. Some of them they're related to, or the firefighters or everything. There was one instance where a lady took 2 house fire calls back to back. She knew both of the families. Somebody died in one of the fires that she knew. She was in that center by herself for the rest of the night. So she had nobody to talk to.
Same center, different dispatcher, took a call from a retired police officer, and he was suicidal, and her husband was also a police officer, and she tried talking him down, and she couldn't. She didn't. He was going to do what he was going to do, and he did it. And her husband was the first one on the scene.
Oh, man.
And she was in the dispatch center, a room this big, by herself.
Right.
No backup.
Nobody.
Nobody.
It only took one call for you. It's only going to take one call, no matter if you answer 400 or 500 a day or 400 or 500 a career.
And that's why I said it was very shitty of me to assume that.
Right.
That just because it's
you
a
just
smaller
didn't know.
town or a
we all do
smaller
that,
town.
right? We're humans. We're all going to put together these reasons why in our head.
Yeah.
For the peer supporters who are out there, bring dispatch into it.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're just a fire department team, you need to take care of your dispatchers as well. And there's dispatches now that have their own peer support teams, right? Which is awesome.
I was actually on mine.
Oh, see, there you go.
When it happened. And none of the other people on my team reached out to me.
Really?
Yeah.
It wasn't a very well put together peer support program.
Well, you said
it was in its infancy.
Yeah.
Beginning.
But just don't forget the dispatchers,
Right.
because we'll go out and do diffusings, debriefings for the departments, but then they forget to go up and talk to dispatch, and that you got to loop them in on it.
And I don't want to say it's easy to forget, but when you don't see them,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
certainly,
On the scene.
oh, darn it, we forgot to
Yes.
call them. And a lot of times it seems more like that. But I have noticed that our department, they have been much more inclusive into like a teamwork there.
And luckily, the county that I worked for, part of their FTO program was they had to come work a shift in dispatch.
Yeah.
And they had to sit with us. So every police officer, before they got cut loose, every firefighter, every EMT, they have to come in there to see what's going on.
Right.
So they do have a visual of it. I'd like to think that this person is in that center now because of me, but that center that I worked for now has a psychologist that has an office in that building.
Awesome.
That's
awesome.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't care what the reason is. Cool, right?
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
You guys have basically given the backbone of how we got to the point where you created the Thin Gold Line Foundation and your resource baskets and the Gold Alert program. Give us an overview of the foundation and those things you guys offer.
So a couple of the books that Jason and I had the privilege of coming across when we were going through his later stages of PTSD were Jim Marshall's book, The Resilient 911 Professional, and Adam Tim's book on dispatcher stress and 50 ways you can combat it. So that gave us both a little bit of an insight on, okay, all right, this may help other people if they get to it soon enough, right? So part of what we want to do is we want to get books like that into dispatch centers. So if people out there, if you work for a 911 center and you want to read through these books, we will send you a basket filled with those books, with some coloring books, because why not? Those are fun. We send these baskets filled with, my son hates this word, but swag. We send the swag with all of the fun Thin Gold Line dispatcher appreciation mementos to centers. We have sent them not only nationwide here, but we've sent 2 to England, 1 to Scotland. We're waiting on our Canadian relatives to give us some addresses to send some up there. This basket can be sent to you free of charge, and it's got a copy of each of the books in there and all the swag. And
Part of doing that is they know who we are, and on our website we have links to help people.
we have your links.
Yeah, you do
Yeah.
get FST5 links.
Yes.
Shout out. Right on.
So we vetted the ones that are on there that go with some of our beliefs too.
That way of understanding other experiences gives you context. At a minimum, it's going to give you, okay,
It's that self-exploration.
I'm not alone, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, not just self-exploration. It's like enlightenment to where the bigger world around me has a bunch of me's in it.
Yep.
I'm
Right.
not alone in this, and there is a positive way I can get through this.
Yeah, we've helped well over 2,200 individual. If you break it down by 911 center, it's 76 centers that we have sent baskets to. The Gold Alert program is more geared towards emergency dispatchers who might be in a pickle with different things in the middle of a crisis. You lost your house in a house fire, you're going through chemo or radiation treatments, or any number of other personal crisis things that are going on in your life. The Gold Alert program is geared towards finding those people who need help, whether it's through a GoFundMe page or whatever other kind of means of raising funds for people. We try to vet them. We'll call the dispatch center that they are linked with and make sure that they are, in fact, who they say they are. We send monetary donations to families who are going through any number of different personal crisis situations. So,
And that was developed because as we were sending resource baskets, we were getting requests, this dispatcher needs help. So we modeled it after, Amber Alert, Silver Alert, and then Blue
thin
Alert
blue line.
for, for the police side. So we came up with gold, but it also encompasses dispatchers that have died in the line of duty, because it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
One center, they lost 2 of them in like 6 months
on
the job.
Yep.
But our foundation, it started evolving because it was resources and mental health. And then we dove into assisting dispatchers that needed help monetarily with things that Kathy said. And then when we started learning through social media and everything else about dispatchers dying in the line of duty, I looked for something that had a list or something. There isn't one. There's no
registry.
There's no
Right, no
registry
registry.
for it. So, and there's nothing for them. So we stepped into that one, and we started making small granite memorial plaques that we send one to the center and we send one to the family with a small monetary donation. And we keep a list of them on our website now too.
Now you guys have talked about the website multiple times. Can you give a shout out? Where can people?
it is literally thethingoldlinefoundation.com.
Okay.
It's really long.
Make sure you put the on the front.
Yeah. Our email address is thethingoldlinefoundation@gmail.com.
Well, thank you
Awesome.
guys so much for being on.
Yes.
We really appreciate this.
Appreciate you
you.
sharing your story.
Yeah,
That-
man.
I know that's
That ain't
never
easy.
easy. We appreciate that.
Thank
you.
you guys. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming down.
Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. We have more great content coming out soon. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. And make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline podcast social media channels. Thank you, and have a great day.